Words like communism, capitalism, socialism, and liberalism are frequently used in political discussions, news reports, and everyday conversations. Yet many people are only vaguely familiar with what these ideologies actually mean. They are often reduced to slogans or associated with specific countries, leaders, or historical events without understanding the ideas behind them. This article begins a series that explores these political and economic ideologies in clear, straightforward language. We start with communism, what it is, where it came from, and how it has influenced the modern world. At its core, communism is a political, economic, and social philosophy that envisions a society without social classes or private ownership of the means of production. One of its most famous principles is, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. This phrase expresses the idea that every individual should contribute to society according to their abilities, while receiving what they need to live a dignified life. Someone who is physically stronger or possesses greater skills would contribute more in those areas, while those who are elderly, disabled, or otherwise limited would contribute in ways they can. In return, everyone's basic needs would be met regardless of their wealth or social status. In its ideal form, communism also imagines a society where there are no rigid class divisions between the rich and the poor, and where productive resources, such as land, factories, and industries, are owned collectively rather than by private individuals. It is important to note that this describes the theoretical ideal of communism. How communist governments have operated in practice is a separate question that will be explored later. When people hear the word communism, they often think of Karl Marx, the Soviet Union, or China. However, the basic idea of sharing resources within a community is much older than Marx himself. Many anthropologists argue that some prehistoric hunter-gatherer societies shared food, shelter, and tools among members of the group. These communities generally had little concept of private property, as we understand it today, and survival depended heavily on cooperation. Some scholars describe these early societies as examples of primitive communism. However, this term is debated, and these societies should not be confused with the modern political ideology developed during the 19th century. The modern theory of communism is most closely associated with the German philosopher and economist Karl Marx. During the 19th century, Europe was undergoing the Industrial Revolution. Factories expanded rapidly, creating enormous wealth for industrial owners. At the same time, many workers faced long working hours, unsafe working conditions, low wages, and few legal protections. Marx believed this system allowed factory owners, whom he called the bourgeoisie, to profit from the labor of workers known as the proletariat. According to Marx, this imbalance was built into the capitalist system itself. Together with Friedrich Engels, Marx published the Communist Manifesto in 1848. Rather than simply criticizing capitalism, the manifesto proposed an alternative vision of society. Marx argued that the working class would eventually overthrow the capitalist system and replace it with a society where productive resources were collectively owned. He believed this transition would ultimately lead to a classless, stateless society in which exploitation and extreme economic inequality would disappear. Although many people refer to this vision as a utopia, Marx himself described it as the result of historical and economic forces, rather than merely an idealistic dream. Marx's writings inspired several broad goals that later became associated with communist movements: reducing or eliminating class inequality, ending exploitation of workers, collective ownership of major industries and productive resources, equal access to education and essential services, reducing inherited concentrations of wealth, creating a society in which social class no longer determines a person's opportunities. It is important to distinguish these theoretical goals from the policies later adopted by governments that describe themselves as communist. The two are not always identical, and many historians make a clear distinction between Marx's original ideas and the systems that later developed in countries such as the Soviet Union and China. For several decades, Marx's ideas remained largely theoretical. They attracted supporters among workers and intellectuals, but no country attempted to implement them on a national scale during Marx's lifetime. That changed in 1917 when the Russian Revolution overthrew the Tsarist monarchy. Under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, the Bolsheviks established the world's first state that officially sought to build a socialist society inspired by Marx's ideas. This marked the beginning of one of the most influential and controversial political experiments in modern history. Whether the Soviet system truly reflected Marx's original vision remains a subject of debate among historians, economists, and political theorists. Every ideology looks different on paper than it does in practice. In the next part, we'll discover what happened when communism moved from philosophy to political power, and why its legacy remains one of the most debated in history. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who love learning. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.
Artlist.io. Music licensing reimagined.